Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. We still have people coming into the webinar. All right, so it's 7 o'clock. We're going to get started. Thanks to everybody who's joining us tonight, students, alumni, parents, members of our community. My name is Adina Astor, and I am honored to serve as the co-chair of the Harvard Hillel board. And my co-chair, Livia Brockman, was going to join us. She's under the weather, so we wish her a speedy recovery, and you'll see her again soon. Thanks again. We're going to jump into a bit of an introduction and then into a discussion. Tonight really represents the culmination of many months of work that started last summer. I think a lot of you were involved in that process, helping us to plan and then launch a national, really a global search for the person who will serve as our fourth director of Harvard Hillel. And we're thrilled to welcome Rav Jason back to Harvard. One of his recommenders said that this was a little bit like a Pidyon Shvuyim, that this was our opportunity to redeem a captive from New Haven. So we're very happy to have him back in Cambridge. We are also really excited to share that his arrival, Jason started about a week ago, has really created a level of excitement and energy in the building. At Hillel, students and staff have been enjoying getting to know him better and starting to think big about next year and what's to come next. As you all know, it was also a tough year to be without an executive director. It wasn't the quiet transition year that we planned for. So we've ended a year unlike any other that put incredible strain on our students and Hillel as an organization. We drew at Harvard a huge amount of outside scrutiny. And also we highlighted the ongoing cultural and administrative gaps at Harvard that affect Jewish students. So we're here tonight to reflect on where we are and to look ahead with Rav Jason. So tonight marks the beginning of this next phase of our life as an organization and of our work on campus. Jason and I are going to take about the next 35 or 40 minutes in dialogue, and then we'll be fielding your questions, which you can type into the Q&A at any point. And just please include your name and any affiliation that you want to share with us when you do that. So we're going to kick it off with a big picture question, Jason, which is, how has the work of Hillel in general, and Harvard Hillel in particular, changed since October 7th? What is different or new, and what do you think remains the same?
As I get started, I just want to open with a word of gratitude. I think and hope it's clear to everyone on this call what it means to me to be here. Actually, geographically, I'm still in New Haven as my children finish school for another couple weeks, but here in a more sense that's deeper than geographic, to be back at Harvard Hillel, in the place that really shaped me. But the gratitude I want to express right now is really to you, Adina, and to Livia and the board and the staff who held the Jewish community together at Harvard through I think an impossibly difficult year. So you said, it's very inconvenient to not have a director. And I think, all the 155, 157 now people on the call and me and the wider network of alumni was, always be in your debt for the, I think, in terms of quantity, incredible amount, but also just in terms of quality, the extreme difficulty of what you faced. And wanted to just say thank you. And I'm really excited to work together. But first, I just want to say that gratitude. So what is, what is the work of Harvard Hillel right now, over the coming year, let's say, and going forward? So I want to break this into three parts. The first is, it can be a little hard to remember. Hillel's did have a purpose before October 6, 2023. And there's a lot of different ways to conceptualize kind of the core mission of a Hillel. And I want to offer the one that definitely was operative at Harvard Hillel when I was an undergrad, is what we've done at Yale for the past 6 years, and is what I'm planning to do with the students, which is to start actually from a developmental picture of what undergraduates are working on and towards, which is at a school like a Harvard, where you come in with tremendous talents and potential and drive and a goal and a sense of a duty, really, to take on some of the world's burdens and lighten them. One of the ways of conceiving what you're learning in college is not just, in classes for tests, but what traditions and communities and professions are going to be the ones that you want to devote yourself to. Where will your energy be made good use of? Where you'll be brought into dialogue with people who are exciting and broaden your world? What will deepen your life? What will you be in conflict about things you care about in ways that feel sustainable? And the Crimson makes that case for journalism. The economics department makes that case for academic economics and consulting, right? The history department makes that for things like that, right? Prison tutoring is making it for a certain type of volunteering work, and we are making that case for Jewish life. And the way we make the case that students can live a Jewish life like that when they're not just in college, but in their 40s and 60s and beyond, is by making Harvard Hillel and Jewish life at Harvard while they're undergrads a place that makes good use of their talents, brings them into dialogue with really amazing people who broaden their world, deepens and sweetens their life, brings them into conflict about things that they care about in ways that are sustainable. And so that really is the core, is actually not creating programs that students consume, but apprenticing them in the craft of creating a Jewish community of meaning with and for one another. So that's the heart of a Hillel's work, and that's not going anywhere. So we can talk about, the number of students who are going to spend parts of their summer preparing high holiday services. We can talk about, right, students who are starting this incredible a cappella group, Apikoris, which is raising money for their spring break trip in Israel in spring of 2025, and on and on. But that's the heart and soul of the work. So that's one that is timeless. It was there and it will be there. Then there's a second huge piece of advocacy for the Jewish community, which was always there in the background, but has really rushed to the forefront. And it's been really difficult. And it's difficult for a set of reasons I want to kind of point out. And it's important for Hillel to do for a set of reasons I want to point out. It's difficult, first of all, because the situation we're facing is in many ways unprecedented. And I think President Garber actually has a good formulation of this here. Really, it's striking what he said. Before October 6, 2023, for 3 generations, all of the protests on university campuses were directed either at the administrations or the US government. And all of a sudden, on October 7th, you started getting protests that were directed at other students. And that means that all of the processes and frameworks of free speech, which were really created in the 60s for Vietnam, were built to deal with a different problem. And everyone's trying to work out these kind of generational scale problems in real time. The second thing is that Hillels are not really staffed up for this. There's not an advocacy and alumni coordinator position across the board, where we already have our staff directed towards student needs. And then the third is just we are dealing with a diverse community. You'll hear more about that. And the reason this is totally essential for Hillels to do is it affects Jewish students, and also having your ear to the ground of knowing what students are experiencing and asking for is completely essential. That's the second piece, is the advocacy. And the third is really a synthesis of those. And I just want to share an incredible story from this past week. A group of mostly Israeli students scheduled a half-hour, President Garber's time, and they presented him with an extremely detailed and well-crafted set of recommendations or requests for the university to make policy changes. Things like, given that the School of Public Health has a partnership with Birzeit University, Harvard should also make a strategic partnership with an Israeli university. Given that Harvard has surveyed and reported out on Title IX infractions around gender-based harassment and assault, Harvard should survey students and create a database that is accessible of Title VI, which includes ethnic and anti-Semitism, right, infractions, complaints, and processes, and on and on and on. Really, things that were like fine-grained and actionable, and President Garber responded really positively to those. And Rabbi Getzel and I were involved in the line editing of that Google Doc beforehand and afterwards, before it was finalized and sent to President Garber. So I just want to share, actually, there is a way that actually you can bring these two together. Some of the most effective advocates on a campus are Jewish students, and really supporting them in doing that in ways that I will share. You should all be extremely proud of what they're doing, and hopefully soon there will even be some results to show for it.
One of the things that's really been challenging this year has been navigating the diversity of the Jewish community. There really are Jewish students in the encampments, and also Jewish students suing the university over the encampments. And we've seen both our American Jewish students, our Israeli Jewish students having really different experiences in different ways as well. How do you think the work of pluralism has changed in light of the campus environment since October 7th?
It's gotten a lot harder. I'd say, one of the ways of thinking about pluralism is the more you care, the harder it gets. We don't tend to be, we have to pat our own backs for being pluralists about, people who stand or sit during Kiddush on Friday night, or even who say or don't say Kiddush on Friday night. But then once you start to get to, the closer it is, the higher your cortisol level is, the harder it becomes to be a pluralist. And we all have a sense that every community at some point needs to have some boundaries. And where are those? So the first thing I want to say is really, this is kind of me as stepping in as a rabbi, I guess, is there is a certain type of grieving that I think maybe we all need to do, that the Jewish community is probably more diverse than we think it is, and maybe more diverse than we wish it were. And just kind of making your peace with that is hard and is surprising. And, I have email threads with friends that I have to kind of muster a lot of, forbearance to weigh in on again. And I think we all are doing that in our own lives and our families and in our communities. And so one of the things I do just want to point out is that, there's an ability, if you're just on, social media or something, to silo yourself, right? Or to, different chat groups can have different cultures, which are not representative, and that makes them, they're more homogenous and easier to navigate. But we have the full spectrum on campus. And that's an amazing thing, and it's a really hard thing. So I want to just offer two kinds of pictures here. The first is actually zooming out from beyond the Jewish community, that there is something, and there may be people on this call who disagree with me here, and if there are, you can speak up. There's something kind of toxic, and I found even times kind of sick in the culture of elite American higher education right now, that, to put it succinctly, like Zionist is a dirty word. And I'll share an example of this. My wife has been working as a therapist at one of the graduate professional schools here at Yale, and she was counseling a student, and the student said, I'm really concerned that this other student who is, somewhat has been known to be vindictive would do something really damaging to me, like she might start a rumor that would destroy my social standing, like that I'm a Zionist, right? And you could see, just the, that should be like a knife to the heart. Even for the people in this call in our community who aren't Zionists. I'll say a word about that in a second. And I just want to point out what that means is Hillel's and Chabad's also, but Hillel's we're thinking about here tonight, are presented with a set of bad options. Because one is, you can do your pluralism thing full bore without regard to the outside world, just like we're going to pretend that the weather's fine out there. But the problem you get into is then there's really no place on campus that Jewish students can say, yeah, I'm a Zionist, and not have to worry about how they'll be treated or mistreated as a response. And that's mean to kind of, fully include super progressive students. The other option is to batten down the hatches and say, actually, we'll be pluralists about a lot of things, but not about Israel. And because Jewish students need a place where they are protected. They don't need to be scared. And if you saw, there was a piece in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago about the kind of discrimination against Zionists on campus, where I was quoted really speaking more about my knowledge from Yale. And that second route is what our colleagues at Columbia Barnard Hillel, the Craft Center, took. And a progressive student said that one of the staff members there told her that she and her friends are a korban, have been a sacrifice that the Hillels had to make to carve out a safe space, which is a terrible thing to have to do. But I'm not sure it's the wrong decision, but I just want to point out how there's a kind of impossible dilemma that's thrown at the feet of Hillels. And I want to give a picture of how we are thinking about this and what we did at Yale over the past year and what I'm planning on in the future. And this is the best formulation I have. It's, you know, always open to revision. So if someone on this call wants to offer an improvement, I'm all here for this and always have many topics. So the picture I want to offer here is one of the ways of thinking about Zionism, which is that it's a movement of modern Judaism, right? The first, you narrate Jewish modernity as starting with Napoleon's emancipation of the Jews, late 18th century. Reform is the first movement to spring up. Orthodoxy is a reaction to the perceived failures of reform. And Zionism, late 19th century now, is a perceived failure to the assimilatory response to the perceived failures of these assimilatory projects. And the reason that that's helpful as a framing is we would never allow in our rules of pluralism, which I'll say in a little bit, an Orthodox student to run an anti-reform event. And I think similarly, we say, well, we would never allow, you can't put together a source sheet that has, a few quotes from Abraham Geiger about how he's complicit in the worst trends of the 19th century. So too, Zionists deserve no less protection than that from the, and probably even more because there's an active campaign against them on campuses and, in the world. I don't know if people saw that totally crazy letter from the Ayatollah, Supreme Ayatollah, praising and thanking the campus protesters, saying, we share your thoughts and feelings. Incredible moment to see what is going on in this world. So the reason I'm sharing that is that this is, I think, a helpful formulation of what is off in a pluralistic framework about anti-Zionism, is that it's, we don't have anti-anything else, and we wouldn't do anti-anything else. And so it's the moment when the kind of support for one another, the kind of classic liberalism of a Jewish public sphere gets punctured. And another way of putting this, and this is on a theoretical level, but I hope it'll be clear, is an insistence that, you and I may disagree, Adina, you and I may disagree about a variety of points of, what Jews ought to do on Shabbat, in terms of what we eat, in terms of, a whole set of priorities. But at the end of the day, the basic commitment that we share in a pluralistic Jewish community like Harvard Hillel's is that the only thing we would actually fight about is if someone said, you don't belong here, I would fight for your place. And so I think that's why the stakes get high when, the Palestine Solidarity Coalition or HOOP, these different student organizations are running protests called, Zionists Not Welcome. Then I think there's an ask that even Jewish students who aren't Zionists ought to say, no, at that point, we're going to throw down for our fellow students here. And if you're not willing to do that and not willing to say, when the chips are down, we believe in the fullness of this Jewish community, even though we have our own internal differences, but there's a higher order commitment that we share to one another and our ability to pursue our different Jewish projects. That's when the Jewish community cannot say well, you'll still be welcome for Shabbat dinner, but unless you're willing for your group publicly and through its resources to defend all the other Jewish groups that are willing to defend each other, that's how and where we draw our line.
So with that, I think you're referencing in part this dichotomy in the Jewish community and also what's been happening on campus more broadly and how students are engaging differently with it. One of the things that's been top of mind for us at Hillel over the last year has been this idea that, the time, place, and manner of protest and how students and others engage in those kind of activities on campus needs to be really, really clear and, sort of managed in a way that allows for the educational mission of the school to proceed. And, as a byproduct of that, I think we felt that the Jewish community benefits from really strong support for those kinds of rules, which were already on the books, but not enforced as actively in the past. So just thinking about the way that we've handled that this year, we at Hillel we sent a letter in December to the administration, and there were a series of, action items, things that we wanted to see happen from the senior administration. We've been advocating for a lot of those. A couple of them have progressed, a lot of them have not. And then sort of the protest movement has evolved through the winter and into the spring. So now that we're here in the summer and looking ahead to the fall, we really have an opportunity to be proactive. It felt last year like every time we thought we were moving in a direction, there was a new event that derailed or sort of moved us to respond to it. But now we have this opportunity to think ahead. What's the direction that you hope to see Harvard moving in? And how do you see Harvard Hillel, sort of advancing that proactive approach in relation to some of the questions of speech, harassment, and all the things that happened this year?
Yeah. That is the question, right? So I think the first thing is, I can give a picture of where we ought to head, and then, kind of, in my opinion, like break it down then into, its component parts. I think the picture of where the university ought to be and where we ought to be advocating for is actually like pretty clear and distinct, which is no more and no less than a classic liberalism. And what I mean by that is a deep commitment that everyone is obligated to by virtue of their being a student or a staff member or a faculty member at Harvard to the work of teaching and research and the cultivation, transmission, and expansion of knowledge. And that trumps, in our roles within the university, trumps our other commitments. So an example, a glib one, but one that might be helpful, right? If you're on the basketball team, even if you don't like the center's politics, you still have to pass to her when she's open, right? You have a job and you need to put certain things aside in order to do that job. One of the most kind of heartbreaking examples I think of from Yale, and this actually happened before October 7th, but I only learned about it afterwards. There was a student who was a young undergraduate in a biology lab and was being mentored by an older, more experienced student on an experiment, and they're chatting while the experiment's running. They get to chatting, oh, what courses are you taking? I'm taking a bunch of courses, including a language. Oh, I love languages. What language? Modern Hebrew. And the older student's face falls, and no more mentoring is provided or scheduled. Just never worked out after that point for them to overlap. And that's a really clear example where you have, also talk about, anti-normalization. This person hasn't made any political statements. They've just said, I'm studying modern Hebrew. And, we all, whatever your politics are, you ought to unite against that. Because it's someone saying, I'm allowing my politics to get in the way of and actually supersede my commitment to my responsibility in this lab towards, the success of the experiments, towards the mentoring of the student. And so that, I think, in a very basic sense, is what universities ought to be doing. Another way of saying it is, I don't think that universities, including Harvard, should be extracting loyalty oaths to Israel or to any other state or cause, including America. But they should be extracting loyalty oaths to the work of the university. And if you are not willing and able, and in some sense eager, to put some personal commitments aside and engage in the liberal project of the university, there are plenty of other institutions that are structured that way. And I'll just give you two kind of examples of this. Again, I'm rich in examples from Yale because that's where I'm coming from. I imagine there are similar ones. Two different stories from this year. One is when Pericles Lewis, as the dean of Yale College, held a dialogue event. He held a series of them. A group of students attended and walked out in protest because they were protesting dialogue, which is like it's like, okay, if you're going to stake out that position, go like that's the opposite of what we believe in. And the second one, which I find actually like quite moving, is a student, he'll be a junior in the fall, was in an engineering class, and I had noticed someone he'd taken classes with who was Muslim had been posting really, really I'll say terrible things on social media. And one morning, this Jewish student gets a text from his colleague and says, hey, I slept through lecture yesterday. Can you send me your lecture notes? And the Jewish student says, here are my lecture notes. And also, I've been really troubled by what you've been posting on social media. Can we talk? And so I said, how did it go? And he said, well, I guess it was a success. We talked for 2.5 hours and no one yelled. And he said, but this student, he said, it was really troubling. He's from a conservative Muslim background, and his parents, his siblings, his community, his imam, everyone he kind of ever talked to believes, the UN had no right to give away the Palestinians' land, and Israel's an illegitimate state. So the IDF is a terror organization, and said, like, how can you say these things? And talking, so like, on the one hand, wow, like, what does this mean about, the world and, the West and, people's commitments to the international, legal order that is the UN and Israel's right to exist. And those are all like troubling things. And at the same time, like, what on God's green earth is a university for other than you meet people from radically different backgrounds with fundamentally different worldviews, that you've never met someone like them and they've never met someone like you. And you spend 2.5 hours talking about what you really care about with no one yelling. So I want to just kind of put forward that picture. And you saw these split screens here, here at Harvard during Apartheid Week, right? Where there were these really, propagandistic walls glorifying terrorists, but also saying ceasefire now. And at that point, Blinken was saying Hamas is the reason we don't have a ceasefire. So who are they? What are they even advocating for? And they that through versus a table that said, let's dialogue about Israel, right? Which is not just playing on opposite sides of the game. They're playing different games. That makes sense, right? There's one that's like kind of this agenda around advocacy and one that's really an agenda around education and dialogue. And that's, I think we should be proud to be on that side and, on the side of the liberal democracies and Israel here. So the, there's a whole set of ways that then becomes around, time, place, and manner of protests and, the smooth functioning of university celebrations and teaching fellows not bringing their politics into classrooms. And I think one of the things which I think is really critical here is, and Adina, even one of my teachers here, the disciplinary structures at Harvard are not built to address these kinds of problems. They're actually built around the paradigm case of plagiarism or plagiarism allegations, which has two critical features. One is that it's more or less victimless. And two is that no one actually other students don't even know of the allegation. And so for those two, right, it's just a TF or professor notices something, they flag it, it goes to the ad board. And so for those two reasons, there's very, very high levels of secrecy or privacy, maybe you would say, around the proceedings. And those two assumptions are not accurate right now in terms of, right, that there are victims, there are students who are particularly Israeli, but also many other Jewish students who are being subject to harassment. And second, that the incidents themselves are public. And so when the proceedings, and especially the results of the proceedings, are not made public, there's no reaffirmation of the shared norms of the university community and structure. And that is a massive problem. Like my day in social studies 10, we read Durkheim. He said, this is the purpose of actually the function of punishment in a society, is for the institution and the collective to reassert its strength and its norms. And that is loudly absent. Until I would say actually, President Garber did step in with, and the ad board and the college, some administrative steps, which I think, and then were contested and people fought back against it, but there was an assertion of, the capacity to say like, no, certain things are off limits here. I do just want to say one more word about this to give you a picture of how fine-grained some of this is, and this will lead into what alumni can do later on. One of the things that I learned last week, which is my first week here, is that each school has its own ad board, in the college versus the divinity school versus the law school. There's a high degree of almost sovereignty to there's not an appeal structure. And one of the problems that creates in the structure is that if, say, a student from the divinity school and a student from the law school together harass a student from the college, it's not actually obvious how, whether it's the law school, the divinity school, or the college, ad boards that would hear that case. And it's entirely possible that, since the two offenders are in different schools, they would receive very different punishments, even if they did exactly the same things. And possible that the, kind of representatives of the college and that student would have no say, or how it would work out is just, there's not a precedent for that. And so I think part of what we're seeing is just a real gap in the ability of the structures that exist within the university to meet the moment. It's our hope through the task force and other places that there is energy and effort there. And I don't know at this point whether to what exactly to tell you about the prospects there, but we'll have some thoughts about how to monitor that and keep advocating in the months ahead.
Thanks, Jason. I wanted to talk a little bit about some more tangible sort of day-to-day things that we've been working on and, sort of where it stands and how we can move it forward. So, even before October 7th, we had been very focused at Hillel on, number one, the declining numbers of Jewish students on campus, and really a concern about both the equity of what that reflects, and also just the practicality of having a critical mass of Jewish students overall, and for any, for any segment or part of the community to have enough students to really keep it going. We've been working on dining and ensuring that there is a kosher meal plan that's equivalent to everybody's meal plan, and making sure that what has been a huge gap, which is basically breakfast and lunch, as well as hot Shabbat meals on Saturdays. It's been a real problem, and so we've made a little progress, but not a lot there. And security costs continue to be extraordinary, and especially since October 7th, even more so, both in terms of the needs to harden security structures around the building, to have a lot more security coverage at the front desk and around the building. And so we've been asking the university to really step up and help us support the quality, the safety, and the sort of the livability of the Jewish community at Harvard. But the reality is we don't have a lot to show for it. It doesn't mean that we're going to stop, but I'm curious sort of how you think that fits in with the broader landscape that you see, and what we can potentially do at Harvard this year.
So this is, I think, exactly the right expansion of what we've been talking about up till now. And the larger question of which everything we've been speaking about, the anti-Semitism and trainings and discipline fits in, is the question of, is Harvard doing what it can and should be doing to support its Jewish community? And that is the question, right? And this is a critical piece, and we'll look at the other ones you just listed: dining and security and admissions numbers. And I think the way, there are a number of ways to frame this. One of them is, I think we as Jewish alumni ought to hold Harvard to the standard of, Harvard should not lose prospective students who are accepted to, say, Harvard and Yale or Harvard and Princeton to another school because their math department is better or their theater program is better. And if that's happening, Harvard should itself sense that to be a problem. And at present, those kinds of losses vis-a-vis, richness of Jewish community are happening to those other schools, not across the board, but a number of times. And that's not just a problem for the Jewish community, it's also a problem for Harvard. And I want to now walk you through, there's a kind of slide that has, kind of rough comparative data for Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, just to give you a picture of some of these kind of provostial things, which are like so much less interesting than oh, what are you doing about protests? They're not going to be Atlantic op-eds, but they're really critical to the welfare of the Jewish community. So I'm going to share my screen here and walk you through this chart line by line. So the first line here is the Hillel's annual security costs. So at Harvard Hillel, we pay roughly $250,000 a year. And this is in personnel. I want to be clear, there's a Securitas guard. Reynold is terrific. He knows everyone. But it's actually several shifts to cover the number of hours. The building is open, plus high holidays, plus, late hours if there's a tish in the building after Shabbat dinner, et cetera, et cetera. It's $250,000 a year. Yale, this Joseph Slifka Center for Jewish Life, where I was an employee until 2 weeks ago, pays about $5,000 a year. And just the structure, 10:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. every day is covered by Yale security. There is, if you want to keep the building open overnight for Sukkot or late one night, Slifka Center pays for those hours and nothing more. Princeton, it's a slightly larger number at $25,000, their Center for Jewish Life, but it's a similar structure. And the intuition here, I just want to be clear, just think about it for a second. If you have a student who keeps kosher, right, and Hillel's the only place to get kosher dinner, the picture is really clear, right? If you eat at any dining hall, your security is obviously Harvard College's responsibility. But if you keep kosher and go to Hillel, the Jews have to pay for that on their own, right? That's the message. And just to be clear, it's not the gifts that go to support that Harvard Hillel's paying don't even receive university credit. This point for it's really I think an abdication of the university's responsibility to protect its Jewish students. If God forbid there were some type of attack or incident, no one would care or should care that Harvard Hillel is a separate 501c3. Like everyone in that building is a student. This should be a major priority of the universities. And just want to say, like, and that was a multi-year advocacy process for us at Yale. I hope it won't take that long. And Adina and the board have already really, as of the last few months, been advocating. And I want you all to know this and share this story broadly, because this ought not to be the case. The second thing is kosher dining, right? We'll start at Princeton. The Center for Jewish Life Dining Hall operates 3 meals a day, hot breakfast. It's great. The food's really good. You should check it out sometime if you're ever passing through Southern Jersey. Slivka Center, also great food, only 2 meals a day, no hot breakfast, but still like a really nice facility and menu. And at Harvard, there's only one kind of fresh kosher meal a day. There actually is an option to kind of, for lunch in Quincy, to heat up an airplane style meal, which is about as appealing, I hear, as what I just described. And just because on Shabbat lunch, there's actually no hot food, which is like the exact opposite of what Shabbat should be, unless you're a Karaite. I think the Karaite population at Harvard is 0, maybe 1. But this really ought not to be the case, and it's very hard to justify that Jewish students are paying the same room and board, kosher keeping students are paying the same room and board. Brown worked through this in 1962, and I think in 2024, Harvard can and should. Second is support for the Hillel building. So the Harvard and Yale here are on the same boat, which is you're on your own, guys. But at the Princeton Center for Jewish Life, the maintenance, the cleaning, but the, kind of, windows need to be replaced, et cetera, is all covered by the university. And I think 7 years ago, when there was a capital program to do some needed renovations, the university provided 3/4 of the funds for that. And so I just want to give you a picture, especially as we'll hear about this in future calls, there's need for some structural work, a new HVAC system, and those kinds of things. And okay, like if this is a valued part of the university, the Jewish community kind of footing the bill for that and not receiving any recognition for its contributions is not the way things ought to be. Next up, development support. Again, this is as in the weeds as it gets, but the picture is we actually have no real way to figure out who the Jewish parents are, literally, other than Facebook stalking our incoming students. And that is not the case at Yale and Princeton. As you can see at Yale, there's kind of access to the internal database for certain limited functions, not giving histories, but just contact information. In Princeton, there's a really close working relationship, because the sense, which is true, and we've seen this, in the year since October 7th, is the welfare of the Jewish community and the welfare of the university are very closely tied together, and the development office works in that way, and that hasn't been how they've related to Harvard Hillel. And the last one, which is the biggest, and Adina, you are absolutely right to mention it, is admissions. Now, these numbers are all speculative. No one, if someone has hard data, they are keeping it under lock and key. So we have it, but these are our best estimates. So right, Yale is, we think, about 12% Jewish, some 750 to 800 Jewish undergrads. Princeton, their Center for Jewish Life's estimate is 8.5% Jewish. Our current estimate at Harvard Hillel, the numbers that I've received from the staff are just kind of 8% Jewish ancestry, 6% self-identifying as Jewish. 7 is a kind of stab in the middle there. But even that 7 to 8.5% difference, everyone has 100 Jewish kids in the college. It's a big difference. And I want to actually point out 2 things about that. One is, there's a question, okay, in the wealth, the stature of the Jewish community now and into the future. There's also a second question, which is the type of pluralism that I described of students putting on services and high holiday services and running a vibrant community does have a certain minimum viable threshold. You're not going to have multiple prayer groups and a cappella groups and social justice groups if there are only 300 Jewish kids. And so it's actually not just about like, are there, are Jews kind of equally represented? There is, a volleyball team needs a certain number of talented players, and the theater, the orchestras need a certain number of players, and also the Jewish community needs a certain people just to actually maintain its functioning. And my sense is we are at or probably slightly below that viability threshold. I want people to know that, because this is like a real threat to kind of everything we've described previously, especially when students have the choice between Harvard and another school. The other thing I want to just point out here is a historical piece. And if you listen to the Mark Oppenheimer's Gatecrashers, which has a number of episodes, one of the themes is admissions rates. Adina and I can remember back when we were undergrads and the numbers were higher, and 20%-ish. There is one datum I just want you to be aware of, which is that in 1959, Columbia had a new dean of admissions who decided all of this fuzzy stuff about essays and recommendations, interviews, going to throw out just the numbers, grades, and test scores. And he admitted a class that they estimated was 80% Jewish. And then he was fired. But the reason I want to say that is, questions of equity here, we're like, wow, 25% is the high watermark. It's actually not the high watermark. I don't think our position should be that Harvard College should be 80% Jewish. I don't know whether that's what it would shake out today. But I do just want to point out that there's probably something going on here in these precipitous declines, which is not, as Mark suggested, mere kind of regression to the mean, that Jews aren't as kind of lean and hungry as we forget our immigrant roots. And this is like a significant place for advocacy and making the case to the university that Jewish students are going to contribute a lot, are going to be strong students, are going, in many senses that word, and be very involved in support of alumni is a case that we're making, and I hope you'll join us in making that case. I'll stop the screen share. I can share this around. I want to say this information here, I'm piecing it all together. If there are other things about other schools that are relevant, I'm all ears for that. But this is the case we're making. I sent this to President Garber as a courtesy before sharing this on this call, and sharing it with student leaders also. But this is really a picture, in addition to everything we've said previously about anti-Semitism, time, place, and manner, codes of conduct. These are other critical pieces of Harvard's really responsibilities to the Jewish community in the case we're making in the months and years to come.
Thanks, Jason. That's incredibly helpful. And I think it's really important for us to understand not just what's happening at Harvard, which is sometimes hard to know, but also what's happening elsewhere, and giving us the visibility so that we can advocate in a different way. So I think it's really important to keep all of that in mind, and we'll have to think about how to do that moving ahead. I want to get to questions. There are some questions in the chat in a minute. Before I do that, though, I wanted to just ask a last sort of short question, which is, we've been talking about some of the major themes from this year, which have been challenging, and some of the gaps that we see, but also there are a lot of good things happening and some new things. And I know a lot of us who are not on campus every day don't really have a way to know what's happening from afar. So do you mind just sharing a little bit about what's new, what's different, and what's good that's happening right now at Hillel and with Jewish students?
So I'll share. I love the right. It's not the same. You feel this, right? I mean, people. I'm sure people on this call. As you visit Israel, right? You read about these headlines. It's politics. It's the coalition might split, and then you go there and you're like, wow, the cafes are amazing. The music is beautiful. So there's something, and all those problems are real. We need to think about them. And work hard on them and worry about them. So something similar is true at Harvard Hillel. I'll share just a few examples, and you can follow our social media and you'll get better pictures. It's an amazing trip of 40 students, 20 Harvard, 20 Yale, to Hungary and Poland. Just a couple weeks back, they actually spent a Shabbat together, studying and meeting each other down in New Haven over the spring. They traveled, great food, and they clearly were having an awesome time. And there were, I think, something like 68 applicants for this trip. Just to give you a picture, right? There's something that's deeply desired, that people are creating, this happening through Harvard Hillel. It's a lot of people want to be involved. Two other examples. The second one, I mentioned this earlier, Api Chorus, which is the revived a cappella group. It was Mizmor Shir back in my day, is up and running. Two really lovely undergraduate co-presidents. They had a big concert in Central Park. Some of that, 100 people at it. And they are working, you'll get a big email about this, to raise $40,000 because their spring break tour in spring 2025 will be in Israel. And they want to fund that. And so just to give you a picture again, that's not what you think of happening. I'll share just one incredibly moving story from the one conversation I've had with these students. They said in the second semester, they started in the fall, that, they said our sound wasn't the best, but we were building on it. We held another set of auditions in the beginning of the spring semester, and a student came and auditioned, and she was a leader of one of the other a cappella groups. He said, you're great, you're here, terrific soprano, but why are you, leaving that group, joining our group? And she said, after October 7th, I feel a need to be with my people. and that group was there and is, all the better for it. So just to give you a picture, like the excitement, and you'll hear a lot more about that and a lot more from them. And the last is on Thursday afternoon, I was on a call with a group of staff who are starting an ERG, an employee resource group, I think. And there's one, there's a women's caucus and an LGBTQ one, and a disability one, and there will be a Jewish one. And they were, kind of talking about ideas for the group. It's going to include Israelis, just, how to think about that. And then, they closed with almost a good and welfare. And one of them shared this story. He said, there was something, I guess, that got sent around on one of the email chains in whatever school he's in that was really upsetting. And he put in a piece of something on the feedback form that went to their VP. He said, at the end, I decided to add my name. I was kind of scared about that. And so my VP actually sent me a really supportive email. And my ask was that he address it, and they had this weekly Zoom call of about 350 employees, and the VPs dedicated like several minutes and spoke very forcefully on it, and then asked to have like a one-on-one follow-up. And he said, I was so happy this happened, and then people were responding to him like, wow, that's terrific that you did that, thank you. And so I just want to share that the kind of the sense of agency that Jewish students are, I mentioned students earlier, and now staff is actually important. And the last thing I'll just say on this front, which I think is like a really important conceptual move, is we need to advocate for the university to change, and ultimately we need the university to change. And at the same time, that core intuition of Zionism that Herzl had watching Dreyfus's trial is, wow, it would be an error for us to place our welfare in the hands of these forces of enlightenment. We need to take our welfare into our own hands. That kind of recalculation is one that I've seen Jewish students and staff and faculty go through again and again this year. And it's one that encourages also to kind of focus on our own agency in addition to the advocacy, not just look of what will happen, will this policy come down and change, but like what have we done in terms of standing up, speaking up for ourselves, making something happen within Hillel. And that's on some very basic level and some very deep level why it matters so much to you all here, because I think you feel that intuitively. And we're committed, Adina, as the board, and me as the director, to finding ways to support you in supporting the Jewish students and really making the case for Jewishness, making an incredible thing again, despite everything that's happening.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm going to just take some questions out of the chat and we can talk about those. There are a few questions that I'll combine that talk about, how do we envision working with different constituencies, different groups of people on campus? One group was faculty, specifically Jewish faculty, and also thinking about interfaith leaders, so chaplains and others on campus. How do you think about that type of partnership?
So, I mean, there's incredible Jewish faculty at Harvard, and I'll just share, I found them to be extremely engaged and supportive already in my early days here. And I think figuring out how to for them to coordinate each other, build something, and which is partly on advocacy again, and partly just like, maybe Monday nights, okay, this week it's Michael Sandel, next week it's Martha Minow, right? The week after it's, Noah Feldman in the dining hall, and students get to have dinner with them and learn with and from them. Like, that's an amazing thing. At Stanford, they actually do a faculty Shabbat dinner, which isn't about the faculty members coming. It's about the faculty members host, 8 or 10 students, and they organize the whole thing. It's incredible. Maybe we'll do something like that this fall. So I just want to say they're an incredible resource, and it's one of the really deep pieces of the tradition. I was actually emailing with Stephen Greenblatt, who I met at a faculty bagel brunch in fall of 2001 or something, and he's still around, and I'm back. And so I think we're really excited to help those generations connect and help faculty connect with each other. Especially across the kind of siloing of the university. In terms of the work with the other groups, I think it's extremely important, and it's it's not easy. And part of what we learned is where you can't stand up these relationships on a dime. Like, I'll share a very moving moment. At Yale, my colleague Imam Bajwa, who was in the Hartman Imam's program in its first cohort, and I had known for a number of years, called me in the spring of 2021 during the last round of fighting. And he said, Jason, I want to let you know that Yale's for Palestine is having a rally, and they asked me to speak. And I said no, because I disagree with some of the things that are posted there. And I think that, a lot of things went right there, including Imam Bajwa being a person of very, very deep integrity. was, thinking about that, that's not the only thing that matters. He and I also would study Al-Farabi and Maimonides together over the years. But what I'm trying to describe is to really find ways of connecting, not just across differences, but there's tremendous things to be done in the Jewish Christian Bible study that runs, and there's a lot of vitality there. And when things get hard, those relationships can matter in a deeper way, specifically of helping those staff, and ideally also the students they work with, realize that there's something apolitical in a certain sense of their role here at the university. So those relationships are very important. And I want to give a big shout out here to Rabbi Getzel, who has really been steadfast in cultivating those relationships over the years through Harvard chaplains and other directions. And that's just work that never lets up, and we need to keep doing as being good citizens of the university. We're also kind of communicating about how Jewishness and how Israel matters and are not the very ugly thing that is portrayed in many circles around Harvard right now.
And I would add, for anybody who hasn't seen it, the video of Rabbi Getzel with the imam at commencement delivering the joint prayer at the beginning of commencement was really moving. They worked very hard on that, and so I'd encourage everybody to take a look at it. So I want to ask you another question. There were a couple of questions in the chat about engagement of students, especially in this environment. There was a specific question about how we see the role of Hillel engaging grad students. And also just a question more broadly about sort of what's your vision for how to engage Jewish students across campus?
Yeah, great. So for grad students first, one of the interesting things that's happening in higher education, I'd say we're probably 5 or so years into this, is the recognition that graduate students are kind of systematically underserved population. And what I kind of mean by that is, right, if you're an undergraduate, everyone gets that kind of your welfare as a human being is more important than, the Dante class you're taking. But if you're a grad student, you have a tyrannical PI who just cares about whether his next grant from NIH comes through, or you have some old Dante professor who's yeah, you better spend 6 years in the basement of Houghton, otherwise you have no chance at getting a job in, Italian. They don't really care about your welfare as a person, and there aren't kind of deans out there looking for you. So that a kind of request from the university administration is please don't be part of the problem and just care about the undergrads. So that's actually super helpful to know. And it's hard to work with graduate students because the older you get in the university, the more heterogeneous the population becomes, right? All the undergraduates are mostly 18 to 24, right? They tend not to have kids. They tend to live in, right around campus. There's whereas grad students, if you're a 26-year-old HBS who's going back to Amazon afterwards, or you're a 31-year-old in year 8 of your complet PhD who has no clue where you're going next, those lives are very different. And so it's harder, and you might not be even living in Cambridge anymore, or Somerville. So it becomes harder to kind of build programming, but that doesn't make it any less important. So just in terms of when you take a problem seriously, you put resources towards it. Last year, Harvard Hillel had a part-time grad coordinator, Mariah Litt, who was fabulous, and so fabulous that we decided to keep her on in a full-time capacity. And she has been doing great. There were 80 grad students at the grad Seder. We never had a grad Seder before. So that is kind of ongoing work that's building. And I think, again, also in terms of linking grad student stuff with undergrads, there's a lot of potential which we've only begun to tap into. I think, was there another part of the question? Oh, and just general engagement. So yeah, I think here's the basic pitch is, which is a high bar to meet, but we're going to meet it because Judaism's that good. Harvard is one of the most competitive places in the world in the sense that at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday or 7 p.m. on a Friday night, there's 100+ really compelling places you could be. You could be playing pickup basketball at the MAC. You could be, working on your PSA. You could be, tutoring kids in, Roxbury. You could be going to your cute TF's office hours. And the question is whether our staff and what we're creating is more compelling than that. Not for everyone all the time, but for a lot of students a lot of the time. And if we are doing that, then people will come partly because Jewish students they feel obligated to, but partly they will come because mostly because they really want to. And the image that I always describe for kind of how a Hillel can do that is, you kind of come to know the people there very deeply. So you're like, wow, my life is so much richer and so much broader because you are in it. I've learned things. There's a certain type of person I didn't know about. So to have that experience over and over with other students, so that when someone walks in the door we've never seen before, the first thought that comes into your mind is, well, I don't know what you have to contribute to this community. And I don't know what this community is going to give to your life. We're going to have like an amazing time figuring that out. And once that happens, it kind of builds on itself. And so that's, I think, our mandate is the staff. And I could go into a lot of detail, how you make Shabbat dinner be that way, how you make an undergraduate retreat be that way. But that's the basic goal, like no more and no less.
That's a good place to end, actually, because I think what we'll do now is there were a bunch of questions in the chat about how alumni can engage, how we can, better serve alumni, and how we can facilitate alumni doing more. So I want to respond to that. But I also just want to mention, and I know, Jason, you'll speak to this in a second, this is not the only conversation that you're going to have with this group. There will be more to come. And so lots more opportunities to delve into what you're talking about and more concretely what the plans are, what the strategies are, and how people can engage in that. So not to think that this is the only moment when we'll talk about it. I think when Jason has an opportunity to spend a few months with the staff and students working on a plan for next year, that'll be something that we can share more about. I want to just respond on the points about alumni, and it's really, really exciting to see so many questions and ideas for how we can work with alumni at Hillel. We need to do a better job. We know that. It's become very clear this year that we have not built the infrastructure or the relationships that we want and need. And it's really exciting to think about what we can do together. So I think what we would say in the short term, things that you can do. One is to follow us on Instagram, read the Crimson, and really, stay close to what's happening on campus. I think what's interesting is that when you do that, it's not monolithic. You see that the experiences of Jewish students on campus are varied, that opinions are varied, that the activities that are happening are a mix of response to the broader events in the world, but also things that are really close to home and personal to students. And so staying close to all of that will be great for having a better sense of what is helpful and how you can get involved. And what we would say also is help us listen to students and encourage them to speak up and be engaged in whatever way they want to be. It's a tough time right now to say or do anything that's reflective of Jewish interests, of Jewish observance. And those of you who do know students, please just continue to encourage them wherever and however they do that. And if Hillel can be helpful, obviously, to connect them with us. A third thing that we think is really important is to help us press Harvard administration on the specifics of the time, place, and manner requests. And by the way, the board of Hillel will be sending out another letter in the next few weeks with sort of an updated version of that based on our experience this spring and some very directed requests that build on the ones that we've done. So really pressing on that, but also what Rav Jason showed earlier, which is the areas of Jewish life that could benefit and really need investment by Harvard and by the senior administration. So to the extent that we can be targeted and specific in what we're asking for, the better. And we would appreciate all of your help in doing that. And then lastly, we do want to have you as thought partners, as sort of co-collaborators in all of this work. And stay tuned. We're going to be working on a plan to do that next year, and we'll have more to say about that over the summer. And with that, I want to turn it over to Jason just to sort of share his vision for the next few months and what comes next.
So the first thing is, I see we're 155 here. So you should know that this is not our last chance at dialogue. This is our first one. My email address is up on the website. We will be holding another one of these probably later in the summer as we, kind of the year comes into focus on the programmatic level and also on the advocacy level. I think there are a couple things that I really want to say at this point. The first is we committed to like being in touch with you, understanding your priorities, visiting you in a city, and, we're figuring out a travel in-person events beyond, the Boston and New York ones. So if you aren't already kind of participating in or Donnie's incredible webinar series, Brett Stevens is tomorrow night, probably the last one of this year. But those are truly remarkable. I will share, we stopped doing them because we realized we couldn't do anything as good as what he was putting on. I do want to say something. I'm seeing a few questions come in about, well, what is Harvard Hillel doing for alumni? And I think that there's something double-edged, and I just want to be clear about it. Like, we care about y'all and your Jewish lives and want to understand what resources we can provide. And at the same time, this institution is primarily here for Jewish students and staff and faculty who are at Harvard right now, and for the rest of us in the world to support them and advocate for them, to understand and provide the kinds of things that any alumni community provides for its students on campus. And I do want to be really clear about that, because I think we are not, if you're living in Seattle or the Bay Area or Florida, we are not as well positioned as local Jewish institutions are to support you all. If there are Harvard-specific things, that's our responsibility. And questions, or that we're here for a lot of things, but I just want to be super, super clear about that the role that we're asking you to take on is really advocates for the Jewish community at Harvard, which is primarily its current students and their capacities for self-expression. And I do want to just read a paragraph here in kind of the spirit of what Adina said about really staying focused over the long haul about the work we're doing, which is, fine-grained and difficult. This is from Connor Fryersdorf piece in The Atlantic today about a different issue, the kind of swing and the politics of policing. It says, outrage politics provide a poor foundation for lasting reform. A movement powered by outrage turns out to be too unfocused to identify the most prudent reforms, too radicalized to avoid overreach, and too shallow and fleeting in the support it commands to survive sustained challenges. And so I want us to kind of take that all in. The community organizers often talk about moving from rage to outrage, right? Having a sense of a slow burn. And what we are dealing with at the university, questions of admissions, questions of funding, questions of the security realities, and questions of the cultural question. What does it mean now that there's departments and programs who are not on board with the liberal program of what the university is? Those are not going to be fixed between now and August, or now and next August, or now and 3 August from now for some of them. And what we need is this community's focus and advocacy in a very sustained and effective way. So to the extent you know people who care about this, you have ways you think be involved, you have a gift officer who calls you, you're back in Cambridge and you want to ping someone from Mass Hall to meet with them. Those are all very, very important. And we want you to kind of join in what the undergraduates are doing, which is raising their voices and contributing to this community. And I want to give one last plug, which is just in terms of this, you understand that we are committed to a lot more students at Harvard traveling to Israel for a whole host of reasons. You can imagine it deepens and humanizes the relationship. And that is not cheap. The university is more and more international. There's more and more travel, and we're committed to fighting the forces that want to denormalize Israel and to showing people instead our vision of what a beautiful place it is. And we can't do that on a shoestring budget. And so just as one picture of where your funds go, they actually have there's a direct pipeline to giving people real experiences that aren't just social media and aren't just propaganda, but are the opposite of those things, of traveling on Hillel-supported trips, Hillel-guided and structured trips, and having experiences that will bring back to campus and will shape this place forever. And I want to thank you for partnering in that and invite you to keep doing so, because we need all of us to be doing this for a long time.
Thank you, Rav Jason. It's so exciting to have you with us and looking forward to working with you. And thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. We'll look forward to speaking with all of you again soon. Laila Tov and Chag Sameach.